Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NASM Live. My name is Prentice, and as always, we've been doing this for a while. I am here with Wendy Batts and Marty Miller. How are you all doing this afternoon?
Great.
Fantastic.
And again, as always, we have our producer, the man pulling the strings in the back, Greg. And Greg gives everyone a salute. So as you all can see right now, today we're going to work on an OPT program for seniors doing a Phase 5 program. Now, I know I'm just saying this tongue in cheek, but hopefully we don't break our seniors doing Phase 5. Joking, of course, you can do Phase 5 programming. So why don't we just go ahead and get started? Why don't we go to the next slide, and Wendy, tell us why we want to do Phase 5 training for our senior population.
Yeah, so, Marty and I do this every week, but we get excited about some of these topics because we get to talk about the importance of different populations, with this particular week being with seniors. And it's an important topic when dealing with senior population because of the importance of stuff like balance training. That's going to help reduce the chances of falls. So, falls among the elderly, especially those with osteoporosis, are associated with high morbidity and mortality and involve high-cost medical intervention. So, in fact, falls are responsible for 90% of the growing increase in hip fractures and are the sixth cause of death among patients over the ages of 65, which is crazy to me. But falls are multifactorial. Their causes are categorized by intrinsic, which just means personal, and extrinsic, which is environmental factors. So some examples of intrinsic include altered balance, neurological disease, sensory deterioration, musculoskeletal diseases, postural hypertension, and of course the use of medication. Research shows that altered balance is the greatest collaborator towards falls in the elderly, with a high correlation between balance deficits and the incidence of falls. And so for this reason, studies regarding the risk of falling and osteoporosis are at a high priority in clinical intervention, which diminishes the incidences of falls, which is a health priority, which reflect both on the quality of life and health costs long term. So additionally, evidence suggests that exercise reduces the risk of fractures, showing an effect on the maintenance of bone mass, and more importantly, improving postural stability, mobility, and consequently, I can't even talk today, diminishing the risk of falls. So indeed, improving balance would be an objective in the prevention of falls. So, that's what we're actually going to focus on today. You're going to see in the program that we're going to show you next, Marty and I put together a program that I've used with our senior population. And we've taken, all of these stats and this information, and we keep that in mind because oftentimes we feel that trainers, when they're working with senior population, are scared to use the OPT model. And that's one of the things we want to cover with everyone today, that every phase of the model is going to be dependent upon your client, of course, but don't let age be a factor, because when you're designing a program, everything is for a specific adaptation, and everyone's adaptation is going to be different. And so when we're dealing with the population, and especially in Phase 5, we're dealing with strength, and of course their strength may not be a 1 rep max, so we're going to keep that in mind, but then we're also on the speed side, speeding for the train of life.
So let me ask you, before we really dive into the meat of the program, you said senior and you said elderly. So can you give us an age range to give our listeners an idea of who they're going to be working with?
Well, I think it really depends, because, when you say seniors, 65 years is considered a senior and older. And so this could be used from that way. However, I am training someone that's 67 and he has a body and the mindset of a 45-year-old. So, yeah. So that's a hard question, but technically 67 older.
Yeah. And how much and just picking up on that point, how much does their biological age into your programming? Because it's the 21st century, Wendy. Just because they're older doesn't mean they're old. So
that is true. As I get older, I keep, moving what I consider old up and up and up. So, but that's what, brings us to the next slide actually is, when you're doing your subjective information, I mean, find out their mindset, have they ever moved, like, and I say moved, have they ever worked out before? Are they moving now? What is their state of mind? And then what is their body showing you? Because a lot of times mentally, a client may, may think that they're older because they are looking at their age as a specific number, but their body can show you that they could actually move better than their age. You know what I'm saying? Like their age and their mentality rate or their mental capacity are just different. It's just different. So I think, when we're talking about stuff like that, when you're sitting down with them, you're going to gather a lot of information that will be helpful on your programming.
Okay, and one more question, and then before we move on, and this is for both of you, but even with people who have a younger biological age, and they still have a fair amount of agility, speed, agility, and quickness, and all of that good stuff, what are some risk factors and other contraindications that you would find or that you would tell our trainers about when working with the elderly client? Marty?
Sure, I'll jump in. So, go back to your park, go back to your medical history. They got to be cleared for activity. But as I always like to say, use the model to your advantage. We're talking about power here, but just like anybody else, you've got to earn the right to progress through the model. So if you're cleared and you're progressively taking maybe corrective or combining corrective throughout all the phases that we have talked about, that extended targeted warm-up, giving them their homework, generally, taking them through in a gradual pace, by the time you get to the level of power, most of those factors should be taken care of. What Wendy and I'll do as we get into the bulk of the program, we'll talk about some unique ways to really put power in and decrease even more potential risk due to the ability of the person. And again, since they're at a more elevated age, we know that they may not be able to decelerate themselves as aggressively. So maybe you don't have them doing full jumps, or maybe they're not catching the ball back at such an aggressive pace. So we'll go over some of those ways that you can program accordingly. But again, go through the model and let the model work for you. But just all we're trying to do here is when you get towards that power phase, just because there's a number there, don't all of a sudden say, well, I can't allow my seniors to train in this method, because if there's one thing, and Wendy pointed out, that is going to save their life, it's going to be the ability to balance and or absorb energy if they do fall, and that's going to be power training. That's that eccentric loading. So we have to take them through that and just what's appropriate. And the way I'll phrase it is everybody's an athlete, whether you're 65, 15, doesn't matter. It's just to what level are we going to tax, your athletic ability, and we'll find the perfect balance as we go through the OPT model. And then today we're going to spend more time focused on the power phase.
All right, awesome. So with that, why don't we move into assessment and talk us through that. Talk us through the process, what you do there with your senior clients.
Well, on this slide, again, subjective information is going to be very, very important when you're sitting down and meeting your client. It's the same doesn't matter how old they are when they come in to first meet you, because you are building that rapport and you're also building the trust factor. But you want to make sure that there is medical clearance. You need to find out if there is specific medication that they're on. Especially, are they, do they have osteoporosis? That type of information is very, very important to find out up front, because when you're, designing your program, which Marty and I will talk about, I mean, if you have osteoporosis and it's, it's very severe, you wouldn't want to put someone on a foam roller. So, be very, very specific and ask a lot of questions when you're getting your subjective information. And then you're going to decide what transitional assessments make sense for that individual based upon the information that you've gathered up until that point. Looking at their PAR-Q, listening to their goals, and then also what is their overall objective. And so Marty and I decided, because we are kind of using more of a general, like we're saying, senior population, we didn't do a specific case study. So some of the common assessments that are often done on the senior population is the overhead squat. Now, again, how deep they go, it may not That could be a factor, of course. And then also, if they've never done a squat, or they're scared to do a squat because they're scared of falling, instead of putting their hands over their head, then you may end up just having them maybe hold the back of a chair, but still set them up in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, have them raise their arms, see, on a static posture, did you notice any changes even without movement? And if they feel comfortable squatting, then have them perform their traditional overhead squat assessment. So set them up in the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints with their shoes off, perform the squats and gather the information as long as it's safe. And then from there, if you want to do additional assessments, could you do a single leg squat? If their overhead squat looked fantastic and they're comfortable doing that, you could. Is it something you want to use with caution because of what we just read about with the falls and the statistics? Absolutely. However, it can be done. We chose to use more of the push and pull assessment instead, which again, would be sitting, for instance, on a bench with a cable or band behind them, and they would just go into a chest press. And you're looking to identify, does they go forward, what's happening at the trunk, so you can still gather a lot of really good information. And the same thing with the pull, it's just the band would be in a different direction. With this population as well, if they have not been active, remember the show, tell, do, meaning that the trainer shows them exactly what they want them to do. And then you're telling them as they're showing them, and then you're going to have them do. So then they perform it on their own. And then again, you're going to take all of the assessment data, and then you're going to design an individualized program that's based on the results that you gathered in the assessments.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Just take your subjective information, do the assessment that's appropriate for your client, and get the data that you need to build the best program. So are we ready to move on to the next slide?
We are ready.
All right, let's go ahead and do that.
So again, if you were to take in consideration, what you commonly see, which is what Marty and I kind of sat down and talked about, we often see bilateral foot external rotation. We often see that the knees move inward. Instead of an anterior pelvic tilt, we may start to see a posterior pelvic tilt, rounded shoulders, and a forward head. Now, again, this is the initial overhead squat assessment. So this is just came into the gym, and that we have successfully put through phases 1 and phases 2. So after we've done 8 weeks of that, we may have sprinkled in some, phase 3 and 4, again, to their ability, maybe making it, quote, a hybrid, because we may change the load amount, with this type of individual. But after 12 weeks, if we did another assessment, it would be common to still possibly see a posterior pelvic tilt. And again, it may not be perfect, but as long as the compensations have cleaned up and you feel that they're ready for a phase 5, then put it through, put them in a phase 5 program, and let's see how it goes.
Okay. And before we move on to the next slide, I want to ask everyone, or want to say to everyone who's listening, if you have questions, especially regarding training seniors, this is the time to ask, so that you can have those fears, if you have them, alleviated. Because regardless of your age, you need to have power. You need to be fast. Taxi drivers in big cities don't care about your age. You have to move. Okay, so now that we have the information from the overhead squat, we're moving into phase 5 programming. And as Wendy, we're going to assume right now most of these compensations have cleared up, except for that maybe there's still some posterior tilt left. So why don't we talk through the first part of this template?
Yes, and so again, I chose to do a 5 just to show you how Marty and I could design this type of program with the senior population. Keep in mind, when we improve or move faster, risk of fall, those are goals that are very common with this type of population. So when designing a program, remember to think of it as training for the speed of life. And your life you might move faster than your seniors, but again, what is their speed and what are they capable of doing? So Marty's going to talk about why we chose some of this stuff, but we did go ahead and include some self-myofascial rolling. You're going to see that we wrote underneath, it says considerations, and Marty will go through why. But we would have this particular individual, based on the posterior pelvic tilt compensation, foam roll their hamstrings, adductor magnus, and thoracic spine. Marty?
Yeah, so when you're choosing your foam rollers, again, you guys know the contraindications. We got to worry about things, such as blood pressure, circulatory issues, osteoporosis, osteopenia. So assuming that those things are all cleared, just because somebody is in that senior population does not mean that you cannot ever do the foam rollers. We've always talked about having different tools around, different densities of foam rollers. Of course, what feels soft to you might be enough for somebody in a senior population. Some of our seniors have a lack of muscle mass. They can be more frail, so they are not going to need a lot of density. Or if they're in the opposite, where they're deconditioned and maybe carrying a little extra body weight, maybe they can't get up and off the ground. Those are things that you all do each and every day as you analyze all your clients. But what I love to do in my facilities is I always had those lower level, wider tables like that you see in physical therapy, because sometimes it'll be very easy for a senior or anybody that's coming off an injury to use that table as an extension of the floor. Maybe they can't get all the way to the ground, but they can do some of these techniques on those wider tables. So just a food for thought as you're building out your facilities. Now, obviously, there's other vibration tools out there. So again, we're just going to look as if we can do these. We know that it's safe for this individual, and we're not going to limit them just by a number in their age. We have progressed them to be able to control their body in these different foam rolling techniques, just as we would expect anybody else to do it. So we addressed the main muscle groups that were overactive at the beginning of their assessment, so to keep them calm, or we're going to target the muscles that we're going to train, so that way they're prepared for their workout that's coming.
Mm-hmm. And then after we did the rolling, now we have static stretching, which again, I understand it is phase 5. And again, we called it hybrid for a reason. And Marty will talk about why we chose to do static. But we're going to have this individual do a standing ham stretch, and he'll say why specifically we chose that one, as well as the calves, the lats, a pec stretch, and of course an ab stretch on the ball. So Marty.
Absolutely. When we look at the ones we chose, we wanted to throw some different things in there, because there's going to be a lot of seniors that can absolutely do a kneeling hip flexor stretch, but we want to make sure we talked about it here with this population. Maybe they can get up and off the ground, but maybe the pressure on their knee. I mean, we all know that depending on what flooring you have, if you don't have like the foam pads to put under it, that could be maybe more aggressive for someone that's already had some arthritic or joint changes. Or maybe they just simply don't feel comfortable getting up and off the ground. So we've always talked about it, have a lot of progressions and regressions in your toolkit so you can pull them out at the right time. So this is a perfect time for the standing hamstring stretch. Then again, the pec and the lat, because a lot of seniors will have, or all of us, let's be honest, but they may be more pronounced postural deviation, where they have the forward head, rounded shoulders, or that upper crossroom. So we want to address that, just something very, very common. So even when they're improving, we're still going to want to put that in there and get them to get back to their most ideal posture. And if you think about getting them in ideal posture, just like when we do it, it gets your joints in the best position to handle load. Now, all of us here, I know the ages of my colleagues on the webinar, we're in our 40s. Hopefully we haven't had any joint changes at this point, but imagine a 60 or plus, no matter how healthy they are, they're going to have some changes in their joints, whether it's, their discs are just, compressing because of aging, their spinal canal is narrowing, or maybe due to injuries they've had in the past, maybe they're getting some arthritic changes. So again, absolutely important to get them in the best posture possible, so that way we add the least amount of stress to their joints. So that's why you're going to see things like the pec, the lat. Calf is great because most people are going to have some type of restriction in their ankle. And then we also chose the rectus abdominis stretch over the ball because of that posterior tilt. And again, this is in there. Yes, it's a little bit more of an advanced exercise for a senior potentially. But again, this was a progression. We worked them towards how to get on and off the ball. Now, we're there for safety, of course. But just getting them to open up into that extension, letting that rectus abdominis get a little bit of stretch, so that way we can help eliminate that posterior tilt. Again, for everybody, but more so for seniors, when they're tipping their head back, you have to make sure that medically they can do that and they're not going to get lightheaded or dizzy. But again, this would have been a process that we get them to. I wouldn't suggest necessarily that type of stretch the first day you meet somebody, even if it's ideal for them. This is something that you get to know them. They understand how to go through getting on and off the stability ball, and then you can easily add in that stretch if appropriate.
Yes, thank you for that, Marty. And I wanted to go back to a point that both of you made regarding having static stretching in Phase 5 program. And I just want to give the listeners permission to expand their thinking regarding application, because with any athlete, depending on how they've recovered from a bout of exercise, if they are in Phase 5, static stretching is totally fine to get them into their ideal range of motion before they start moving at greater intensities like we would do in dynamic stretching. So there's nothing, having static stretching there isn't counter to Phase 5 programming.
Yep. Especially with what we'll follow up with.
Yeah, exactly. It all depends on how you stack your exercises. And I don't see in the program that you have gone to a max deadlift after the hamstring stretch. So
Wendy tried to convince me. She tried to convince me, but I wouldn't have it.
I know, but I'm glad you reined her in, because that would have caused great confusion today. So, okay, so what are we doing for activation now?
Okay, so now that we've actually lengthened, muscles that are going to be overactive, then of course we want to focus again on core and balance, or in this known as the activation section. So Marty and I chose to talk about the bridge, the standing banded hip abduction, as well as standing single leg dumbbell cobra. And of course we're going to do one leg per set. So Marty, do you want to kind of talk us through that?
Absolutely. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to pick some progressive build up to what's going to be coming. So it's that transition. Now it's time to get their body moving, but focus really again on getting their core activated and their balance. So I and Wendy both like to start with the bridge. We're not going to put them on a single leg quite yet. Could you reverse these exercises around? Yes. Would we say there's a problem with it? No. But the way Wendy and I put it together is, before we put them on a single leg, let's get their glutes fired up. We just did some stretching. Could you do the single leg exercise first? Yes, you can. But just kind of, again, going from easy to more challenging, we're going to start with the glute bridge. So that way, both glutes are firing, their core is firing. Then from there, obviously, that's also an active stretch of their hip flexors. Then we stand up. Then we're going to go into some, single leg exercises. So, the hip abduction is great, getting that glute medius to fire. And now, again, think about the stance leg. We're not only focused solely on the leg that's going into abduction, we're focused on the other side of the body as well, too. Can they maintain their balance? Can they keep their core engaged? Even, guys, focus on the chin and the head and neck. If they're putting their head forward and you're focused on lower body, you're missing some of their core. You're missing a sign and a signal that they may not be as balanced as you need. So you might want to regress maybe to where they hold on gently to something. Or like I always say, put your hand on and maybe just a finger. I also like to have people near something in case they start trouble. They feel safe. I feel safe that they can grab on. Now, I've had the privilege of training countless different people that fall in this category, and I really love watching them progress. Some of them, I've trained men that are 6'4", 250. I don't want them stumbling and me having to try to maintain their balance for them. Always think about giving them that exit strategy. We talked about that last week as well. Put them by something that is stable, that's not going to, cause any injury if they grab onto it, nothing that's moving worse, or where another person in the gym might be using a piece of equipment and somebody gets their hand pinched. So just think about that when you set them up in the gym for this. And then obviously the single leg cobra, now we're firing up those muscles that do the retraction and depression of the scapula. Again, a great way to get the core stabilizers involved, and then the glute on the leg that they're standing on. So these are some of our favorites. There's other exercises you could put in there as well, but just giving you the explanation of why we chose them and the order that we did the glute bridge first.
Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about SAQ. SAQ, just agility is very important for any population, but tell us what you picked for this block.
So oftentimes we hear trainers mention that if you have a senior population, you should not do plyometric exercises or you shouldn't do any SAQ at all. And it's actually the opposite. If your client can perform movement in all planes of motion, then you should absolutely speed them up. However, when we usually see things such as the speed ladder and you're doing different types of patterns in the ladder, what we may see as fast or we see as slow may be really fast for them. So again, when you're showing them the patterns, they have to really think about what they're doing, which is great neurologically. Their body has to respond to that and perform the pattern correctly. And then you want them to speed it up. So, be simple modes to start. You're going to notice we have MP, which stands for multiplanar. So we could have you just walking one step in each box as fast as they can, turn around and come back. And then 2 feet in each box, turn around and come back. And then the in, out, to try to get some frontal plane movement. And then eventually get them into some transverse motions and different types of patterns. Again, we move in all 3 planes. You still want to train the senior population in all 3 planes. Again, you saw the fall stats that we talked about in the very beginning, and it's the 6th leading cause of death in someone 65 years or older, and that's absolutely scary. So you want to help minimize the chances of them falling and strengthening the correct muscles to help keep them upright. So goes to do a full ladder, speed ladder. Again, you guys determine what patterns make sense for your clients, and then start them out walking through it, and then eventually get them to go faster. After that, Marty and I have hurdles, multiplanar again. Marty, do you want to talk about why we chose that?
So just building off everything Wendy said, it's such an important part. And guys, the only other thing I like to slip in is the cognitive part of this, the accidental exercise. A lot of you, have gone and heard me talk about cognitive, is that we're also training their brain simultaneously. And there's so many benefits that come from getting people to have to learn new tasks. And I can tell you that the seniors love this part of training. So, the hurdles are fabulous too, because now we're moving again in that lateral motion, that frontal plane. And if you're looking at how someone would step over that ladder, again, it's triple flexion. They're going to flex the hip, flex the knee, dorsiflex. Make sure they do that movement pattern as you would an elite athlete. Then as they come down, they're applying force down into the ground like an elite sprinter. And as they transition, they have to stabilize on that leg that they put up, over, and down on the ground on that leg. So it's a transitional balance. So again, you can have a lot of fun with it. You can play games with it, but it's such an important thing to put into their program. Plus, it's another way to sneak in some cardiovascular work as well, depending on the rest ratio, the work to rest ratio you need to provide, as well as the tempo they can go through at. So to me, this is a must, and I think it's often skipped too often when we're programming for a senior population.
And another thing to piggyback, just on top of the hurdles, think about this as well. You'll notice as people start to age, when they're walking, start to scoot more than they start to pick their feet up. So this actually starts to incorporate activities of daily living as well by lifting up their feet and really working a lot on their gait in all 3 planes as well. So just wanted to throw that in.
Yep. And I wanted to piggyback on something that you said about parts of one's work template being forgotten. And Wendy, you brought up in the beginning that sometimes, yes, the causes of falling are intrinsic. You lose some sensitivity of the mechanoreceptors in your feet, shrinking, different, you're not getting the same nervous system output because of narrowing of the spinal canal. But then we have that little factor, the elephant in the room of the extrinsic factors. And the point that I'm getting at is, have you all ever taught falling progressions? Because that's part of the environment. We're training standing up in an ideal world, but sometimes the environment makes you ride that pony, and you're going to go down. You're going to go down regardless of what you do. So do you add something into SAQ to teach them how to ride that fall out so that they stay safe? This is me as the old martial art talking. Marty, what do you say?
Well, I'm chuckling because, again, my background too, I've been thrown down frequently. in martial arts. So yeah, I had to learn how to fall quickly. Yes, I do put it in, and you can kind of again sneak it in if you think out some of the other exercises where you finally get them to either that elevated mat, which is I recommend putting something in your facility where people don't have to get to the ground. So there's those physical therapy type mats that are plenty wide for one person to train on, and they sit only a foot or two off the ground. But again, getting people to do even partial extension push-ups, right? They're learning how to load their wrists and load their shoulders, getting them to do modified push-ups, right? Because sometimes you fall face down. So again, building that ability to slowly, and that's why the stabilization phase is so important, right? We're starting that there. Then again, if we, depending on your background and what you can bring out of your arsenal, I'll do a lot of things where they're on their mat, teaching them how to rock. Prentice, you and I would call it a turtle in a shell, right? So you're learning how to rock as if an opponent was over you. That's where in our head. But again, just teaching somebody how to roll and rock or rolling patterns with some closed chain exercises for their upper body and wrist, that's so important. And again, often gets overlooked, but you can also create a fall prevention program and put those in there. Or you sneak it into the people that, don't quite accept that this could happen in real life. And again, with our SAQ, the hops to hold type of exercises, or our plyos, all of those are very important. It's just, again, what skill set you have where maybe you can grab some tools that from a sports background.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, that's an important part of the SAQ training, because just environments, living up where we grew up, always the chance of, and I've done that a lot, slipping on the ice.
Correct.
At a very young age. And right here in Arizona, people hiking up trails, hitting a divot, sliding on some loose rock, those things can happen. So you need to learn how to absorb that, like you both said in the beginning, so that you can stay safe throughout the entirety of the fall.
I did it in the gym the other day. I was there was 2 sets of battling ropes, and for a reason I was a little distracted. I stepped over and I hit the final rope. My ankle tweaked without, again, subconsciously. I didn't have time to think about it. There's no way that I would have been able, I think my ankle is going into massive inversion. It just happened and no injury, nothing. But it becomes from the repetitiveness of all these type of exercises that we always put in. So if we're only doing leg presses, leg extension, those have a place too, but that wouldn't have helped me in that situation.
All right. Yes. Thank you. That's an important discussion about qualing when training your senior clients. And it's absolutely important that they need to do plyo SAQ. You're just giving them keys to better quality of life.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too, Prentice, you and I can throw in is, if appropriate in your facility, I know we have the cleanliness issues, training out of your shoe at some point in time to get that foot truly connected from a neurological standpoint. Clearly, I think people with this, cleanliness thing now may not be the time to experiment that in the gym, but for consideration, there is a place and time to do some of these exercises without a shoe on if you can.
And think about that. That's also a good point. And like the most direct analogy I can think of is playing the piano or the guitar. I'm a guitar player, in those nice thick North Face gloves. Wendy, you don't know anything about that, living in Atlanta. So, but those really thick North Face gloves for sub-zero temps, you don't have the sensitivity to know what you're doing with your hands. And to some degree, shoes function, but super thick shoes function in the same way. So if they're orthopedically cleared to do something like that, train foot when the situation is proper to do so, as you're saying, Marty, I take a couple of opportunities over the course of your training time to train bare feet. Okay, so now let's move on to resistance training. Tell us what you did and why you did it.
Well, just before we actually do that, we actually have prisoner squat, and I wanted just to step back before we go into that. And the main thing is when we think of prisoner squats, again, they think of it as a very dynamic exercise. And Marty and I actually have our seniors do this the exact same way. So Marty, do you want to talk about how we would set up a squat really quick before we get into resistance?
Yep. So again, guys, second A squat, feet hip width apart. We're looking for that ideal motion, form and technique, right? Limit their depth and limit their speed according to what they can do. But what we like about it, and Wendy and I discuss this, I don't know why I feel like I have to try to demonstrate it. With the hands on their head, if they can, they're going to get up on their tiptoes, and you can even have them pause there, and then they just lower themselves at a speed that is dynamic. It doesn't have to be a drop, and you don't even have to we're not looking for a jump squat. It's just up on their tiptoes and then lower themselves at a speed that feels appropriate for them. And I always like to do build-ups. So I tell people, hey, we got 12 reps. First 3, I want slow and controlled. Next 3, pick it up 25%. Next 3, pick up 25% more. The last 3 might be the only 3 that are truly dynamic, but that's okay for an individual like this. Or that's someone that's a rock star like Wendy was talking about. All 10 or 12 can be at a fast tempo under control that's appropriate for them. But you're getting that triple extension, you're getting that triple flexion, and the ability to not only accelerate themselves, but really decelerate themselves under control, of course.
Yeah. And again, if they can't leave the ground, that's fantastic. Again, you have been working with this individual for 12 weeks, so they may feel comfortable with that. But again, how high they jump and, we're not looking for some crazy vertical from, this type of individual. But if they feel comfortable leaving the ground, great. But just know that is a fantastic alternative, as well as Marty just said, tiptoes and then down to the ground. But then after we've got ready to go. I mean, so again, think of it as an extreme warm up for the superset. And again, a phase 5 is a superset that is a strength exercise followed and paired with a speed exercise utilizing the same muscle groups or the same pattern. And so we're still going to follow that, but you're going to notice instead of being, as fast as possible for both, we actually put like a 1-0-1 tempo for the strength. And so that's another reason we called it kind of a hybrid, because we did take into consideration this type of client and, what's in the best interest for them. Again, you're going to individualize your program, but that's why when you see it on the template that it looks different than what you're normally seeing in the textbook. That's the rationale of why we did that. So to begin, Marty and I chose a standing staggered stance cable chest press, and we paired that with a medicine ball chest pass, and he has no rebound written down, and we'll discuss why those would be a great pair.
So we like the stag, gives them, a nice base of support to be able to move a little bit more weight, but also really makes them focus on their lumbopelvic hip complex still in their core. And then the reason we chose to no rebound is a lot of people can accelerate something, but if it's a rebounder, those things, you can't really modulate the speed back. Generally speaking, it's going to come back faster than most people might want that aren't really in that athletic phase yet. So we decided that, just for an example, they accelerate as much as they want. I'm going to roll it back to them. Or I might take 2 steps in and toss it to them so they're only decelerating a portion of what they're accelerating. That's fine. It's a beginning part of this. Down the line, yes, I'd love for them to be able to absorb more of that energy. That goes back to our falls, right? The more of their body weight they can absorb, the better it is if they fall and can catch themselves. So this is just the first time, so I'm not going to be blasting it back to them at a high speed.
Yep, and then we would then go right into a standing row and then follow that up with a banded speed row.
So we chose these because, one, we love rowing, anything that gets that posture, but then maybe they're not ready for an overhead medicine ball throw, anything that is that aggressive. So bands are a good bridge to a full power exercise. So straight up, yes, it's not full power development. Some of your motion has to be in deceleration, right? You can't fully pull on a band the entire movement. We understand that. But getting a band row going still is teaching our nervous system to move more quickly. It's safe. We don't have to worry about a medicine ball. We don't have to worry about anything like that. We can get them right into it, increase their cardiovascular demand, and it's going to be safe for them. Could we eventually move to something else that is a true 100% power movement? Yes, they can be. But again, this is better than ignoring the power phase completely for a senior.
And then we would finish with a modified lunge and then pair that up with a speed step up.
Yeah. So again, when we say modified lunge, what does that mean? It means as good a form as they can control to a depth they can control. Do we care if they go down all the way to a full lunge yet? No. And a lot of people say, well, why even bother lunging? Well, if you look at how seniors may need to get up and off the ground, they're not going to do it as nimbly as we would. They might get on to hold something and then slowly lower themselves down into a modified lunge, and they won't even realize it. So why not build that into their program for them? Now, as we progress, maybe the depth does get lower, and maybe they don't even have to hold on to something. So modified could be the depth and or holding on to something. Either work. Maybe you do it with a TRX or suspension training, and they're holding on, and you stop their depth. So there's a lot of different ways you can do the modified. The key thing on the modified is it's not full depth, and they might be holding on to something for a little bit of balance. Totally fine. And then a speed step up. You guys know that, again, you have multiple ways to do step ups in your facility. It could be as small as a 2-inch riser, 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch. Probably no need to do higher than a standard height of a stair that they're going to face. And again, a speed step up to them could be really slow to us. That's fine. Single leg, keep the front leg on the step is the way I like to do it. So once they have their foot there, they know where it's at and they don't have to keep putting it up there. And then it's how quick can they come up and touch with the other toe. Again, we want full posture. Don't let them do it, slow them down if they're not getting all the way to full extension. And again, no problem having them hold on. It's just, are they able to get their central nervous system working a little bit quicker than if you never addressed it?
Client's choice. Of course, we have triceps, which Marty and I discussed this in detail.
Wendy, you can discuss this because being the female, this was your client's choice.
Well, yeah.
Because you got to tell the story.
Well, I was going to say, if you've ever had an advanced aged individual come in, one of the biggest complaints from a female, especially, is that they start losing, their muscle triceps. And so they start jiggling and they don't like it. And they call them old lady arms. And so, oftentimes we all care at any age what our arms look like. But as you continuously get older, we all notice that you start to lose some of your muscle mass. And unfortunately, that's one that's visible. So triceps are super important. So we put them in the program, and that's our rationale why.
Okay. And what I want to do really quickly, I'm going to make a really long statement, so bear with me. I just want to point out the mastery, the art of the program design. And this is where I'm going with this. Kurt Thomas, as some of you may know, just passed away untimely. I think that was Kurt Thomas with the gymnast with the cerebral injury, vascular injury. And I had a friend actually passed away a year ago today, who was very biologically young, very active, but had an undetected vascular issues. Everything checked out normally on his history. So what I was getting at is normally in phase 5, we have 1 to 5 repetitions, but sometimes, and the intent is of course relative, but that requires sometimes a Valsalva maneuver to help you get past that sticking point. So can you just speak to that as something that you would want to recognize in an elderly client and modify the intensity exactly the way you've done in this template? Marty, do you get where I'm going?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, remember how at the beginning I said let the model work for you? So again, as we start to go through the model, you're going to be working on building up their stability, working up on their mobility in combination with how they control movements and ready to handle load. And part of that should be the entire time you're working on breathing techniques. You're teaching them when to exhale. Now, as the load gets higher, it's going to be even more important. But in all honesty, the first time into the phase 5, do I really care that they're doing 5 reps? No, I right now, that's not the time. The time is to transition them. The model is written in a perfect world scenario. So we don't train in a perfect world scenario, but it doesn't mean you can't use the science and then continue on the model, then tweak it. So if I'm working with a senior population and everything's checked out and I'm just about to bring them into this phase, I'm going to start with a higher repetition range. And then Wendy said, I'm going to control the tempo to what I feel is most appropriate for that individual at this time. as they show me the ability to progress, as they show me that they can control these workouts, as they show me that they now know how to do everything, including the proper breathing techniques, I may choose to increase the load and decrease the weight. But you'd really have to give me the reason why, if now, again, I've trained clients in their mid 60s that they work on cars as a hobby. Well, they might pick up a tire or a battery or a this or a that. So I might say, okay, maybe they're more conditioned, or I need to condition them for this. But if they've had a spinal fusion, if they've had arthritis, and chronic or knee replacement, I might be like, there's no need ever to get them to that amount of load. So again, you've got some gray area to play in there. The model's written in a perfect world scenario, but don't be afraid to hybrid it for any population. We're talking about seniors today. It's just you have to be able to justify the reason you put in what you put in, but there's nothing wrong with going towards a phase and just tweaking it so it makes common sense for the individual working with. But if you're going to go towards those heavier loads, you're probably going to want to limit range of motion. There's nothing wrong with maybe a modified deadlift where you're using the platforms where they're only picking it up maybe from a chair height if you feel the need, right? What's the odds of them having to pick it up from the ground? So once again, you're just going to hybrid the movement, maybe not the phase. So it just really comes down to common sense and making sure that you're only doing it because it's going to benefit the client and it's the right time in their program to add that, and that all the boxes are checked so that the way they can do it with perfect execution for them, and safety is the most and the only thing that we really need to focus on. Yeah. So I hope I addressed what you were getting at. You
did. You addressed it perfectly, and that's just simply you're there to work with the individual using the model. You're not trying to pigeonhole them into the acute variables of a particular phase, and you have to do what's right for the person in front of you. So thank you for that explanation. I think we're ready to cool down now. So what did we do and why did we do it?
So you'll notice that there's not a lot of change in what we chose to foam roll. Again, we would take the same considerations in, but if we know that they could foam roll and they did it in the beginning, they definitely could do it at the end. Or as Marty mentioned, the vibration tools. If you want to use like something such as like a hypervolt or some kind of gun on them and it's safe and they like it, feel free. Again, it needs to make sense and they need medical clearance to do so. And then we would finish with static stretch. And again, you'll notice that we chose the calves, the standing hip flexor this time, lats, and the wall pecs. And Marty, do you want to talk about that?
The key thing, again, just the reason we did it at the beginning is these muscles tend to be overactive for most people, especially a senior population. We know that they have a propensity to get tighter. We know what happens as we age. We lose less of our hydration in our muscles. So, we're definitely going to spend time inhibiting and then also stretching out those muscles that, again, would put their joints in any type of stress. They're going to feel it more than we might. Even if we're having some muscular imbalances right now at our age, for all of us here on, we might not feel it yet. But any time that you can get your clients, especially that senior population, their joints back into their ideal position, you have absolutely decreased the amount of stress placed on the articular cartilage and the bone and all the things that tend to cause pain. So that's why it's so important for us to make sure we finish with that ideal cool down, which is going to work on those muscles that'll put people into bad posture.
Okay. That was a perfect explanation. This was a really good program, and it really, I go back to what I said earlier, it shows us the art how to use the model, and it's not just a one-to-one trying to plug someone into it in the book. You have to be able to play with that gray area to build the best possible program for any demographic. So thank you both for this education. It's been fun. So now, while we're waiting for questions, if there are any questions, please ask them now. We are backing up to the hour, so want to make sure we get your questions answered before these good people have to go on about their days. So, Marty, what are your big takeaways for today? And of course, tell us where we can find you.
Certainly. The key thing is, I think it's a privilege to be able to train a senior population because when you see what you can do with them and really how the model, once again, is there to guide you right through it. And when you watch how much you're going to change their lives from simple things, like they're going to come in and get excited about how they can go to the grocery store and carry their groceries or get down on the ground and play with their grandchildren. Fitness is great for whoever you're helping, but sometimes you just get these emotional connections when you really see that something what you take as simple is brought back into somebody's life. So don't pigeonhole them, as you said, Prentice. Make sure that you go through the model, get creative, be fun with it, and just make sure that you hit all the phases in the appropriate way. And then to get a hold of me, you see my email there, marty.miller@nasm.org. And I forgot to tell Wendy, I did a change on my Instagram to make it more applicable to what my background is, because I made this a long time ago. It's Dr. for Dr. Marty Miller 72. So I apologize that is not printed correctly. So it's Dr. Marty Miller 72.
Okay. And Wendy, you have the last word.
Oh, I mean, Marty just said it perfectly. I think the big thing is, when you do have a senior, I think be excited, learn to train all populations, but, this senior population is very rewarding. I think, keep in mind there are seniors that are running full marathons. And at my age, I struggle doing that. So again, don't just assume because they're old that they're not capable of really being challenged. So I think, do what you do, meaning get the objective and subjective information that's going to really help design the best program for any type of population, including senior population. Have fun with them, and just make sure that it makes sense, and don't be afraid to do some adjustments phase if it's going to benefit the client long term. And you can contact me at wendy.bats@nasm.org. And my Instagram's not even on there. So I don't know what happened to this slide, but you reach me at wendybats13. So sorry about that, guys.
You've heard it, people. Wendy does not want you reaching out to her on Instagram.
Apparently not. Oh,
well, thank you for those who hopped on today and were able to spend some time with us. Thank you, as always, Marty and Wendy, for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. It's always insightful. And thank you, Greg, for flying the ship today. And we will see you next time. Everyone take care. Be safe.
Bye-bye.